What's the most deranged thing you have ever seen anyone do? I was in a bar when some guys got into an argument. The aggressor got kicked out and the guy who he started a fight with went to the bar and everyone continued. As I'm going out for a cigarette, I see the guy who'd had the fight started with him going out the door and the aggressor was waiting outside and jumped him. Motherfucker immediately stuffed his fingers down his throat and vomited on the guy. Straight up defense mechanism puke. The guy who was trying to fight just ran away, one of the wildest things I've ever seen. A guy I knew got super fucked up in the bar and started a fight by hitting on some other guy's girl. Punches were thrown and the bouncers got in there, so my buddy squirms away and runs outside. He's out in the parking lot, and as the bouncers are coming out the doors to get him, he drops his pants and starts pissing straight up and trying to catch it in his own mouth. The bouncers went back inside. I doctor here. Where shall I begin? I remember one young lady who came in for a routine visit, but her eyelids were very swollen from her fake eyelashes. The adhesive was laid on thick and was literally blocking her gland orifices and causing massive infection of both eyelids. Despite the severe swelling, she didn't seem particularly fazed. It wasn't even her reason for visit. I looked at her under the lamp, then told her that those lashes are going to need to go. So I turn around to grab some petroleum jelly and some tips to work those adhesive clumps off slowly when I start hearing what sounds like Velcro being torn apart. I turn around and she ripped out both top lids of fake lashes, including every single natural lash she had. It was a startlingly clean job and she just looked at me completely bald-eyed and said, "Okay, now what?" Don't forget, they were infected and swollen. Well, now they were even more swollen and had a ton of ripped-off lash stumps. So I prescribed her antibiotics and told her that her lashes would probably grow back over the next few weeks. Gal I went to culinary school with all of a sudden started juggling her knives in the hall between classes in front of one of the chef instructors. Yes, she immediately had her 8-inch chef knife stuck 3 inches in the middle of her palm. Chef just sighed, shook his head and pushed the gal to the office to get her to the ER. I had a younger cousin who I was adamantly scared of when I was younger. Refused to be alone with her, stopped tagging along to holidays in their area. The kind of kid that pulled out a box of crickets under her bed to show me how she pulled off their legs and put tacks through them. She cut my hair in my sleep during a sleepover. She flattened her mom's tire once BC she wouldn't take us to a movie. She was about 7. Last I heard she was in therapy and living with the grandparents today. Mom couldn't handle her. I was sitting at a cafe once when a man sitting a few tables away from me locked eyes with me. Maintaining eye contact, he leaned over to the vase of pussy willow stems decorating the table and munched them. Just took a whole bite of twig and fuzzy willow bud. Worked in an ICU. The patient was being asked their goals of care and if they wanted to be resuscitated. The patient said yes. Her daughter said no. The attending said, "Well, your mom is still competent, so we have to follow her wishes." The daughter pulled the doctor aside and said, "Why don't you just give her some medications to put her to sleep? She won't be competent and then my word goes and you pull the plug." Silence for a while and then the attending just said, "No, we don't do that." Very slowly and escorted the daughter out of the room. The patient made it out of the hospital okay that time anyway. I sometimes wonder how she did after that. This kid a couple years younger than me growing up used to sit alone at the breakfast tables in school, look kids dead in the eyes, and smash little jam packets and milk cartons. We got older and he destroyed a computer in the computer lab out of complete nowhere. Fast forward to when he's 17, he moved in with his grandparents because his parents couldn't handle him anymore. One day he goes ballistic. He kills his grandparents' cat with a club, beat the living shit out of both of his grandparents, and gets in a shootout with the police. They shot him and he died. The craziest part is how we found out about it. After a day at the lake, my buddies and I were hanging out at my buddy's house. We were randomly reminiscing about how weird this fucking kid was and wondering what had happened to him. This sounds made up, but I swear to God, in middle of this conversation, I'm mindlessly scrolling Facebook and randomly see a link to a GoFundMe for his funeral by a mutual friend on Facebook. The room went silent and we all immediately felt like shit for laughing at this guy who we now knew had died. It felt like a sign from the universe to stop being assholes. Then we looked into how he died and were like, holy fucking shit. We then didn't feel that bad for him, but we sure as shit weren't laughing anymore. One time I transported this kid who had been displaying homicidal ideations. His family cat had kittens and he drowned them in the sink. His parents, naturally, were upset, so he flushed their insulin down the toilet hoping they would die without it. He was 5. I watched a person shit their pants, be forced to wait 20 minutes sitting in their own shit, and upon getting inside and having a chance to change, I watched this person choose to eat a whole cheese pizza first instead, while sitting in their own shit. Back in college there was a local crazy woman who was around campus. Not sure if she was homeless, but she didn't seem to be. Clearly had some undiagnosed mental issues or didn't take her medication. She was always hiding her face and would turn sideways if she noticed you looking her way. Was in a Burger King near campus and I was with a small group of people when she was behind us in line. We basically just ignored her until one person in the group turned around and said, "I can see you." I have never before or since that time seen someone flip out so bad. I imagine someone might have the same reaction if you threw acid in their face or if they were on fire. She was screaming like she was in pain, and after a few minutes, she just started yelling all this really weird shit and throwing anything and everything she could, not at people, but just in the air and all over the place. Police showed up and ultimately got her out. The guy in our group was never allowed back in. There was this one time back in middle school, I was probably in 8th grade at the time. I was walking to school about 2 streets away when I saw a woman grab a kid off the street, drag him into her van, beat him, drive off about 150 feet, then pull over and throw the boy onto the road and drive off. I still have no idea why, who she is, and how she thought that was a good idea. I was 10 years old and a girl walked out of Safeway. She was a thin, pretty 18 or 20-year-old girl who looked perfectly normal. She took out her groceries and sat on the curb and began eating everything: a large container of ice cream, a loaf of bread, chunk of cheese, boxes of donuts. When my mom started driving away, she was still sitting there working her way through her groceries. I guess she was bulimic, but this was in the 70s. I really didn't know what was happening, but it wasn't normal. Driving past a suburban train station with a 40-kilometer speed limit during a quiet time of day, I saw a guy in a pink leotard and matching tutu doing a gymnastics routine on the grassed area. Okay, slightly weird, until he did a handstand with his legs at 90 degrees out to the sides, and proceeded to do a shit out of a hole in the leotard that caught my attention enough to say that it looked like he was giving birth to a log. He was also wearing a tiara and had a look of complete concentration on his face. I thought about calling the police for a welfare check until I realized that the police station was right next door, so I just kept driving. Had a patient that was angry she was in the hospital and would throw herself face first into the floor. Repeatedly. She'd actually dive into the floor, like she was diving into water, but it was a linoleum floor. Broke her wrist the first time, put her on restraints, she'd seen good. Take her off restraints, and she'd do it again. But her is the kicker. She was not mentally impaired. She was angry at her husband for having a mistress, so she decided to run up her hospital bill to try and bankrupt them both before he could leave her. Edit: to clarify, this woman was not mentally impaired when she came in, she was there for a routine and fairly simple surgery. The next day she was totally different. Evidently she's found out about the husband, or he told her or something. I don't know how she found out. I just know it was the most intense and one of the saddest things I've ever witnessed. San Francisco, 2012. I was walking out of my hostel, headed to the airport to fly back home to London. On the other side of the street I saw a homeless man. This man was crouched down, stock still, with an ever-growing circle of pigeons around him. He suddenly shot back up to his feet, the pigeons all scattered. All except one. He was holding one pigeon in his hands. He stuffed it into his inside coat pocket and just shuffled on his way. I presumed that would be his lunch. Restaurant kitchen, middle of the busiest night of the year. Something went wrong, not sure what, but I'm pretty sure it was a fairly small setback. Sous chef goes ballistic, screams at some people, then reaches bare-handed into the blast oven and grabs out 2 scorching hot bowls of baked soup, ruins his hands, and throws them into the window with the skin from his palms visibly stuck to it in places. He immediately calms down, walks off the line to treat his hands, came back out to try and direct from the front for a bit, then at some point just went home without saying anything. Came back a week or 2 later divorced from his wife. 2 people fighting at a bus stop, then one of them pulls out a large knife and begins to cut himself in front of the other guy. He was slashing himself whilst stepping towards him and screaming, "Come on." I didn't hang around to find out what the outcome was, but yeah. When I tell people this story who know me, they're like, typical London. And they may have a point, but seeing it firsthand was quite scary. My football coach destroyed our starting QB's D1 offers because they got into a fight mid-season. While the main starters were getting offers, he was always wondering why he wasn't. The last day of his senior year, the coach with a smile handed over the 20-plus offers he had, but all too late. He was telling schools he wasn't interested in going. To this day, I think he would kill him if they crossed paths. I watched a guy chase down a goose on a golf course, rip its leg off, put the leg in his pocket, and continue the round. In a nightclub in the late 80s. Bloke sitting at a table on his own. He poured what he had left in his pint glass onto the floor, then took a bite out of the glass. Glass severed his top lip. He then sat there bleeding into the glass. There was a lot of blood. Not pretty. Many years ago, I am with my dad downtown Edmonton on Christmas Day buying my girlfriend last-minute earrings. It's -30C. We stop at a sub shop to grab lunch, and as we are eating, I suddenly spot something that puts a stunned look on my face. My dad asks why I look so perplexed, so I tell him to turn around and see for himself. Here is a 6 feet 4 inches black man, buck naked, trunk waving in the cold winter air, barefoot, walking down the street outside. People chasing him with blankets trying to cover him, but he shakes them off and keeps marching. Found out later in the newspaper that he had lost his job and snapped. Merry Christmas, everybody. Overnight at a friend's house, his cousin lived with him at the time. Cousin gave friend a BJ, friend told me to let his cousin give me one. I declined. Never stayed the night there again. Was like 4th or 5th grade. Also see my comment history about Randy, the burrito fucker. Same cousin. Edit. Here's the story of Randy, the burrito fucker. My friend's cousin growing up was named Randy. He was special. Friend and I stayed over at Randy's house. Friend and I crash on the couches in the living room. We get woken up to Randy microwaving a burrito, proceeded to sit on the recliner between us, closer to his cousin, took a bite or 2 out of it, whips his dick out and starts fucking the damn burrito. Friend looks at him, all I hear, "Randy, are you fucking a burrito?" "Yeah, it feels so good warmed up. You gotta try it." Friend said no, and I honestly don't remember what happened after that. Next thing I remember is Randy playing NASCAR on the TV. I went home scarred. Then the story got out around school and he was forever known as the burrito fucker. He didn't even go to our school until a few years later and someone knew the story. Now you all know the story of Randy, the burrito fucker. R.I.P. Randy, I'm sure you're fucking a burrito wherever you are.